My name is Diane Carter. I'm 47, unmarried, and the only one in my family who ever stayed. I never moved to the big city or left the country like my younger brother Mark. I stayed here, in Wilton Creek, Ohio, taking care of everything after Mom died. My father, Harold Carter, used to be a strong, respected man. At least that's what I told myself. But after Mom passed, something changed. Or maybe I just started seeing clearly. Dad's arthritis got worse, and with it, his temper. I was the one who paid his bills, cooked his meals, arranged his doctor appointments, and handled the property taxes he always forgot. Mark would visit once a year and get praised like a returning war hero. I never complained. I kept my mouth shut and did what needed doing. That was the role I was given since childhood. The dependable daughter, the quiet one. Then last Thursday, something happened that split the ground beneath me. Dad called to ask me if I could bring groceries. Again. I said I'd drop by after work. I run a small accounting business out of a shared office downtown. Nothing fancy, but enough to pay Dad's mortgage and keep my lights on. When I hung up, I noticed the line was still active. His voice came through, unaware I was still on the line. "She's a goddamn failure," he muttered, like he was spitting something foul. "Always hanging around like a bad smell. Should have been Mark who stayed. At least he has a life. She's a mistake that should not have happened. Can't believe I'm stuck with her." I didn't breathe. My fingers went cold. It took a full minute for me to move, and when I did, I gently ended the call. Then I drove to the store and picked up his groceries. I smiled when I handed them to him, just like always. He didn't notice anything different. Maybe that's what hurt the most. But I didn't say a word. Not then. I just knew something deep had broken. Something that couldn't be taped back together with politeness or tradition. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and felt years of silence settle on my chest like bricks. The next day, I went to work like usual. Said hi to everyone at the front desk. Sent out invoices. Balanced ledgers. But something was shifting inside me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew it would be something he'd never expect. And it would be soon. The silence in my house felt louder than usual that weekend. I kept expecting to cry, or scream, or slam something, but I didn't. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, hands resting on a cold mug of tea, watching the condensation slide down the glass. Sunday came, and with it, the usual call from Mark. He calls Dad once a week, always on Sunday afternoon, always while on his Bluetooth headset, probably walking through some sunny park in Portland with his golden retriever and his second wife. I know because Dad brags about it afterward. Mark just got promoted again, director now, has 2 new interns working under him. Funny, I did Mark's taxes last year. He asked me as a favor, and I saw the numbers. He's not struggling, but he's not thriving either. It's image. That's always been Mark's talent. He knows how to perform success, and Dad eats it up like it's gospel. On Monday, I stopped by Dad's house after work, like I always do. He was watching television, a game show, the volume too high. He didn't even look at me when I walked in. "I picked up your prescription," I said, setting the bag down on the counter. "You're supposed to take it with food." He grunted. "Did you bring anything to eat?" "I thought you still had leftovers." He scoffed. "Those are from 3 days ago. You expect me to eat spoiled food?" I opened the fridge. Everything I'd made was still untouched, neatly wrapped in containers, labeled with dates, not even opened. I didn't say anything. I just pulled them out and heated them up anyway. He ate in silence, eyes fixed on the screen. When I turned to leave, he finally said something. "You should talk to Mark," he muttered. "Maybe he can help you find a real job, one with benefits." I turned, forcing my face to stay still. "Dad, I run my own business. I pay for everything you have. How do you think this house stays out of foreclosure?" He waved me off. "You're too sensitive. I was just trying to help." That night, I pulled out the box from the back of my closet. It had Mom's name on it in faded black marker. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were old letters, recipes, her gardening journal, and a folder with some legal documents. That's when I remembered something she once told me, long ago, in a quiet voice after a fight with Dad. "If anything ever happens to me, make sure you go through the house papers. There's more than you know." I hadn't thought about it in years, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day, I began searching the old filing cabinet in Dad's study. I knew he never touched it. He couldn't bend down far enough anymore. And there it was, a manila envelope buried under tax returns and car insurance forms. On the front, property, mother's name only. My hands trembled as I opened it, and just like that, the wheels started turning. I sat in the car with the envelope on my lap, the engine still running, the radio off. I hadn't even opened it yet. I don't know why I hesitated, maybe because I already knew it would confirm what I'd suspected all along. When I finally opened it, I found the original deed to the house. My mother's name, Helen M. Carter, was listed as the sole owner. The purchase had been made using money from an inheritance she received from her father, something Dad never talked about. She bought the house in her name only, in 1985. There was a handwritten note tucked inside, written in her neat cursive. If Harold ever tries to sell this house or change ownership, contact Andrea at Warner & Giles. She helped me draw up a trust. The house is protected. Andrea. I remembered the name, vaguely. One of Mom's old friends. A quiet woman with steel gray hair and a sharp stare, the type who always looked like she knew more than she let on. I spent the rest of that night researching Warner & Giles Law on my laptop. They were still in business, still based downtown, and Andrea Palmer was still listed as a senior partner. I made an appointment the next morning. When I walked into her office 2 days later, I half expected her not to remember me. But the moment I introduced myself, her face softened. "You're Helen's daughter," she said. "You have your mother's eyes." She pulled the folder closer and flipped through the documents. Her voice stayed calm and measured, but I could hear the surprise underneath. "Yes, this is all valid. Your mother placed the house in a private trust. It's under her name, and she designated you as the sole beneficiary upon her death." I sat there in silence as the truth washed over me. "All this time," I said slowly, "he's been living in my house." Andrea looked at me carefully. "Did you know he tried to refinance it last year?" I blinked. "What?" She nodded. "We stopped it. The trust prevented the transfer. He must not have realized it's outside his control." My hands curled into fists in my lap. He had tried to borrow against the house, without telling me, without even asking. And he couldn't, because Mom had protected it. Protected me. All these years I thought she left me behind, but maybe, just maybe, she had known. Maybe she had seen how he was. Back home, Harold was still sitting in the recliner when I came in. I watched him for a long moment, taking in the slump of his shoulders, the way he didn't even look up. "You're late," he grunted. "I needed my pills 2 hours ago." I didn't respond. I just set the prescription on the table and left without saying a word. He didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath him had shifted. And I was the one holding the map. It was strange how quickly everything could feel different, even if nothing on the surface had changed. He still sat in that same recliner, still barked out demands like I was some waitress who owed him service with a smile. But I knew the truth now. That house, that roof, that chair, it all belonged to me. But I kept quiet. Let him believe the world hadn't moved beneath his feet. By Friday, he started complaining about the water heater. "The shower's cold," he shouted from the hallway, voice hoarse. "Call the guy." I stood in the kitchen drying dishes. "You can call him," I said, without looking up. There was a pause. I could feel his surprise through the wall. He wasn't used to pushback. Not from me. "You're in one of your moods again," he muttered. I didn't answer. I'd learned that silence said more than words ever could. The next morning, I called Andrea again. "Can the trust be revoked?" I asked. "Or challenged?" She reassured me. "Only by you. He has no legal claim. If he tries, he'll be shut down before he starts." I exhaled. Not relief, certainty. After that call, I drove out to the edge of town, to an old real estate office with peeling white paint. I sat with a soft-spoken woman named Linda and asked what it would take to put the house on the market, hypothetically. She looked at me, puzzled. "You own it free and clear?" "Yes," I said, and the words felt new in my mouth. "I just haven't told the man living in it yet." Linda gave me a small smile and slid a card across the table. Well, when you're ready. That night, I sat at the dining table across from Harold as he picked at the casserole I'd made. He pushed the vegetables aside and scowled. Next time, less salt. I watched him for a moment. You know, I've been thinking about making some changes around here. He looked up, startled. What kind of changes? I don't know yet, I lied. Maybe something big. He stared at me like I'd spoken a different language. Then, as if to assert control, he leaned back and said, Whatever you're thinking, run it by Mark first. He's got a better head for these things. I stood up. Mark doesn't live here. And I left him there, alone at the table, without waiting for a reply. The next Sunday, Mark called. I only knew because Harold shouted my name from the living room while I was cleaning the back porch. He wants to talk to you, he grumbled, handing over the phone like it was a punishment. I almost didn't take it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hey, sis, Mark said, his voice fake smooth, like always. Dad says you've been acting weird. Everything okay? I glanced at Harold, who was eavesdropping with cartoonish subtlety. I walked into the kitchen, lowered my voice. I'm fine, I said flatly. Busy, running my business, managing your responsibilities as usual. A pause. You've got a tone, he said. Look, I get that you're stressed, but we all have our roles. You've always been the caretaker. That's who you are. Something snapped then, not loud, but clean. Actually, Mark, I said, I'm starting to think that's just who you needed me to be. Another pause. Longer this time. Okay, he said slowly. What's going on? Nothing, I lied. Just, maybe I'm tired of being invisible. When I hung up, I saw Harold watching me like I was an appliance that had just made a strange sound. You tell him how you've been moping? He asked, voice smug. I didn't reply. I walked past him and into the hallway, where I opened the closet and pulled out the box of legal documents. I left it sitting on the kitchen table in full view, just to see if he'd touch it. He didn't, or maybe he was afraid of what was inside. That week, I started packing a few of my things. Not much. Just some photo albums, a few of Mom's old cookbooks, and a stack of framed certificates from my office. Things that mattered to me, not to him. I didn't say I was leaving. I didn't say anything at all. I also stopped filling the fridge. If Harold wanted meals, he could call for delivery. I'd done enough. On Thursday, the phone rang. It was Andrea from the law firm. Just following up, she said. You still thinking about listing the property? Yes, I replied, calm and certain. But first, I need to have a conversation I've been avoiding for too long. That night, I cooked one last dinner for Harold. I didn't eat. I just served it, like always, and sat across from him at the table, watching him shovel food into his mouth like a man who'd never had to say thank you. When he was nearly finished, I said it. You need to start looking for somewhere else to live. The fork paused midair. Slowly, he looked up. What did you say? I met his eyes. This house isn't yours, Dad. It never was. Mom left it to me. It's in a trust. You've been living here out of my generosity. That ends soon. He scoffed. What kind of sick joke? It's not a joke, I said, voice steady. And I'm not asking. He stared at me, his face unreadable for the first time in years. Then his eyes narrowed. You ungrateful? No, I cut in. You're the one who's ungrateful. And you don't get to use that word with me. Not anymore. The silence after my words hung heavy. I could see the storm building behind Harold's eyes, but for once, I wasn't bracing for it. I let him stew in it. He shoved his chair back with a scrape and stood, hands clenched. You think you can throw me out? Your own father? I looked at him evenly. You made that choice a long time ago, Dad. I'm just the one delivering the paperwork. His face turned a deep, ruddy red. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for me. I worked 2 jobs for this house. I held up the trust document. This house was bought with Mom's inheritance. She made sure you couldn't touch it, and now it's mine. All legal, all binding. He stared at the paper like it had burned him. You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you? Sitting there, all quiet, all obedient, just waiting to stab me in the back. I was never quiet because I was weak, I said, standing. I was quiet because I believed there was still a chance you'd change, but now I know better. The next morning, I emailed Mark a scan of the trust and a short message. I've asked Dad to move out. The house is legally mine. If you want to be involved, now's the time. An hour later, he called. No hello, no pleasantries. You can't just throw him out. He's our father, Diane. He's your father once a year, I replied. He's been my burden every day since Mom died. You abandoned this place and now want a way in because it's convenient. This'll destroy him, Mark said, as if that should matter. He's already destroyed most of me, I said, but not anymore. There was silence. Then he added bitterly, You've changed. Finally, I said, and hung up. That weekend, I began making arrangements. I gave Harold 30 days to find a new place. I offered to help him apply for senior housing or contact a veterans service coordinator. I knew his pride would reject both, but I offered anyway. He refused. I'm not going anywhere, he barked. You want me out? You'll have to call the sheriff and drag me out in handcuffs. I hope it doesn't come to that, I said. But I will if I have to. He stormed into his room and slammed the door. I heard drawers being yanked open. Later, I found some of my childhood photo albums torn up and tossed in the trash. I didn't cry. I didn't even touch them. I just took out the trash and kept packing. It wasn't just the house I was preparing to leave behind. It was the version of me he thought he owned. The following week was a game of silent war. Harold barely spoke to me, except to mutter insults under his breath or make passive-aggressive comments. I ignored them. I didn't flinch when I found the thermostat turned up to 90. I didn't react when he accidentally spilled coffee on a stack of my tax files, but I documented everything, every broken item, every slur. Every day, he refused to acknowledge the 30-day notice taped to his bedroom door. I kept photos and notes in a folder titled, For Court Use. On Friday, a letter arrived. Not from Harold, but from Mark. It was 2 pages long, printed, formal, cold. He'd hired an attorney to draft a statement claiming I was evicting a vulnerable elder without cause and violating moral and familial obligations. He was seeking mediation before further legal action. I should have been angry, but all I felt was a deep, exhausted sadness. Mark hadn't spoken to Dad more than a few times a year in the last decade, but the moment I stopped being useful, the moment I dared to draw a boundary, I became the villain. I called Andrea, my attorney. She reviewed the letter and sighed. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. The trust is airtight, but it might get noisy if they decide to fight publicly. Let them, I said. I'm not afraid of noise anymore. Still, I knew what was coming. Harold and Mark would spin the story to anyone who'd listen. The selfish daughter, the heartless woman who threw her poor father into the street. And I knew how stories like that traveled in small towns like ours. How truth got chewed up and replaced with drama. People could sip like tea. I spent the weekend cleaning the upstairs guest room. Not for Harold, but for me. I wanted distance, a locked door, my own space in my own home. When I told him I was moving upstairs, he sneered, "Hiding from me now? Coward." "No," I said, walking up the stairs without turning around. "I'm finally living where I belong." That night, he pounded on my door twice. I didn't answer. On Monday morning, I filed the formal eviction notice with the county clerk. I left a copy on the kitchen table with a note. "You have 21 days. This is the legal deadline. I will not extend it." That evening, he called Mark. I heard them talking through the wall. "She's serious," Harold said, his voice smaller than I'd heard in years. "She really means it." "She's bluffing," Mark replied. "Just wait it out. Call her names. Make her feel guilty. It always worked before." Harold was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think I pushed her too far this time." I didn't need to hear more. I already knew. By the start of the 3rd week, whispers began trickling in. At the grocery store, a neighbor asked, "Everything all right with your dad?" In that polite, loaded way people use when they already know something, but want you to fill in the blanks. I just smiled and said, "Everything's being handled." I could tell by the way she nodded, slow, careful, that she'd already heard Harold's version. The poor, helpless widower, the daughter who turned on him, the classic narrative, trimmed of all context and wrapped in pity. I didn't have the energy to correct anyone. I wasn't playing defense anymore. Harold, on the other hand, had become theatrical. He shuffled around the house in his robe like a character in a hospital drama, groaning loudly as if expecting applause. He left dishes piled in the sink, refused to clean his messes, and kept the TV blaring at all hours. It didn't get to me. What did was the day I found Mom's old garden books scattered across the backyard, wet, muddy, pages torn. I'd kept them boxed, hoping to restore them one day. He must have dug them out of the storage room. I stood there staring at them in the grass, fists clenched, but still, I didn't say a word. I picked them up, piece by piece, and threw them away without ceremony. That night, I locked my bedroom door. 2 days later, Harold invited a pastor from the local church over, a man I hadn't seen in years. He arrived just before dinner, holding a Bible and a gentle smile. I recognized the tactic immediately, public shame through spiritual guilt. "Diane," the pastor said, "your father tells me there's been some tension. Families go through these things. I just wanted to stop by, maybe talk a little, pray together." "I appreciate the thought," I said, cutting him off politely, "but this is a legal matter, and one that doesn't require spiritual counsel." Harold stood behind him, fake fragile, hands clasped like a martyr. I looked him in the eye. "Dad, I'm not the same girl who used to cry in her room when you raised your voice, and dragging people in to fix your mess won't work anymore." The pastor cleared his throat. "Well, if you ever need anything, I'll let you know," I said, opening the door wide. When they left, Harold slammed his door hard enough to rattle the frame. The next day, Andrea called. "If he doesn't leave willingly, we'll need to schedule a court date to finalize the eviction." "Do it," I said. He had his chance. The last straw came 3 days before the deadline. I came home to find a stranger standing on the front porch, a middle-aged woman with short, bleached hair and a clipboard. "Hi, I'm from Channel 9, she said. "Your father reached out to us. He said his daughter is kicking him out of his own house and leaving him homeless. Would you like to give your side of the story?" I stared at her. "No," I said. "I don't owe anyone that." And I shut the door. I woke up the day before the deadline to find a note slid under my bedroom door. The handwriting was shaky, but still his. "If you go through with this, I'll never forgive you, and neither will anyone else." I read it once, then crumpled it and threw it in the trash without a second thought. By mid-morning, I received a notice from the county. The court had approved the eviction order. It would go into effect the next day. The sheriff's office had already scheduled the enforcement, 10 a.m., sharp. I sat with the document in my hands for a long time. Not because I doubted myself, but because I realized what this moment meant. I'd never see him the same way again, not as a father, not even as a man I once hoped might change. That illusion was gone. That night, the house was eerily quiet. No TV, no banging pots, no grumbled insults. I thought maybe, just maybe, he was packing. But when I passed his door, I heard it. Soft sniffling, not loud or theatrical, but quiet. Almost human. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. So very tired. Very. I went back to my room and started writing a letter. Not to him. He wouldn't read it. To myself. I wrote down every memory I could recall of the times I kept quiet. When he called me useless. When he forgot my birthday. When he told me I'd never amount to anything. I wrote them all out like poison from a wound until my hand hurt. Then I ripped it up. Burned the pieces in the kitchen sink. I didn't need the list anymore. I knew the truth now. That was enough. The next morning, I was ready by 9:30. Dressed, composed, legal papers in hand. When the sheriff's car pulled into the driveway, Harold was already in the kitchen, dressed and sitting at the table like it was just another Wednesday. "You called the law on your own blood," he said flatly, not looking at me. "I gave you every chance," I said. He didn't reply. The doorbell rang. The deputy, a calm young woman named Officer Meeks, was professional and kind. She gave Harold 15 minutes to collect essentials. He shuffled into his room, not saying a word. He came out with only a duffel bag and his coat. No apology, no argument, just silence. At the door, he turned back for a second. I braced myself, but all he said was, "You'll regret this one day." I looked him in the eye. "No," I said. "I regret not doing it sooner." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut. The house was still. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just stood there in my home, for the first time with no one standing over me. Free. The house was silent for days after he left. At first, I kept expecting to hear his voice, some demand from the other room, some complaint from the hallway. But there was nothing, just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the wood floors, and the sound of my own breathing. And then the quiet became something else. Peaceful. I opened the curtains for the first time in years. I took down the yellowed blinds he always insisted on keeping. Sunlight poured into the kitchen and made the old tiles look almost warm again. I donated his recliner, sold the TV, boxed up everything he left behind, and dropped it off at a storage unit. He could claim it if he wanted, but I doubted he would. 2 weeks later, I invited some friends from work over for coffee. It felt strange at first, hearing laughter in the living room, the sound of casual conversation. But I realized I hadn't felt that kind of comfort in my own home since I was a child. Maybe not ever. Mark didn't call again, not to ask how Harold was doing, not to check if I was okay. The last thing I heard was through a mutual acquaintance. He told someone I was off the deep end and that he was distancing himself from the drama. I let him go, just like Harold. One Sunday, I visited the cemetery. I brought a bouquet of peonies, Mom's favorite. I cleaned the edges of her headstone and sat down on the grass. "I did it, Mom," I said quietly. "I did what you asked. I went through the papers. You protected me, and I finally listened." A breeze lifted through the trees, gentle and full of spring. "I wish I'd done it sooner," I added, "but maybe I had to become the kind of woman who could." I sat there for a while, just breathing. Back at home, I took out Mom's old gardening journal, the one Harold hadn't managed to ruin. I copied her notes into a new one, page by page, and made a plan. By the end of the week, I had seeds, gloves, a new spade, and a small section of the backyard tilled and ready. That garden became my ritual. Every morning before work, I watered the soil, tended to the sprouts. It was slow, steady, and quiet. Everything healing should be. Some evenings, I'd catch myself thinking about Harold, where he was, what story he was telling now. But it didn't bother me. I didn't need to correct the record anymore. I knew the truth, and the people who mattered would see it in time. One night, as I stood in the backyard watching the first flowers bloom, I realized something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not just for surviving, but for choosing myself, finally, fully, without apology. This house, once a place of burden, had become my sanctuary. Not because it was handed to me, but because I took it back. And I wasn't done. There was still a life to build, a garden to grow, a woman to become, one my mother would have been proud of. And for the first time in decades, I was excited to meet her.